The rope chafed against Josephine Zeller's wrists as she twisted in the wooden chair, a thin trickle of blood sliding down her pale skin. The saloon had grown quiet, all eyes fixed on her, some filled with pity, others with a cruel sort of amusement. She'd arrived in Silver Creek, Colorado only yesterday, and now found herself bound and awaiting her fate at the hands of the ruthless Harlan Voss. "You're going to tell me where your brother is hiding, Miss Zeller," Voss said, leaning in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. The year was 1876, and in this corner of the untamed West, men like Voss made their own law. Josephine raised her chin defiantly. "I already told you I haven't seen Thomas in over 2 years. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She'd received a letter from her brother just 3 weeks ago, begging her to meet him in Silver Creek. What she hadn't known was that he'd stolen something valuable from Voss, something the man was willing to kill for. Voss slammed his hand down on the table beside her, making her flinch. "I don't believe you, girl, and I've got all night to convince you to change your story." The saloon doors swung open with a creak, spilling late afternoon sunlight across the dusty floorboards. The silhouette of a tall man filled the doorway, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. The room fell silent as he stepped inside, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "Evening, folks," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. He moved toward the bar, seemingly oblivious to the scene unfolding before him, though Josephine noticed his eyes sharp and blue as a mountain lake darting between her and Voss. "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Voss growled. "Keep walking." The man paused, tilting his head slightly. "Just looking for a drink." He placed a coin on the bar. "Whiskey." The bartender nervously slid a glass toward him, clearly uncomfortable with the standoff. The stranger took his time, sipping the amber liquid while surveying the room. Josephine caught his gaze for a brief moment, and something unspoken passed between them. "I said this doesn't concern you," Voss repeated, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. The stranger set down his empty glass. "Funny thing about that." He turned fully toward Voss now. "When I see a lady in distress, it becomes my concern." In one fluid motion, he drew his knife, a gleaming blade that caught the light from the oil lamps overhead. Before Voss could reach for his gun, the stranger had closed the distance between them, pressing the knife against the outlaw's throat. "Step back," he commanded, and Voss, eyes wide with surprise, complied. The stranger moved behind Josephine's chair, and she felt the cool metal of the blade against her bindings. With a few deft movements, the ropes fell away and she rubbed her raw wrists gratefully. "What do you think you're doing?" Voss demanded, recovering his bravado now that the knife was no longer at his throat. "That woman's brother stole from me. She's staying right here until she tells me where to find him." The stranger helped Josephine to her feet, his touch gentle yet firm. "I'm afraid that's not possible," he said, his voice carrying across the saloon. "She's my bride." Josephine's eyes widened in shock, but before she could protest, the stranger gave her a look that silenced her. This was her chance to escape, even if it meant playing along with this unexpected lie. "That true, miss?" Voss asked, skepticism written across his weathered face. Josephine swallowed hard. "Yes," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "We're to be married. I came ahead to prepare our home." The stranger's arm slipped protectively around her waist. "So you see, Mr. Voss, I can't allow you to detain my intended any longer. Whatever quarrel you have with her brother doesn't extend to her." Voss's face darkened with anger. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, mister." "The name's Everett Xavier," the stranger replied evenly. "And I know exactly what I'm doing." With that, he guided Josephine toward the door, keeping himself between her and Voss. The outlaw made no move to stop them, but his cold eyes promised that this wasn't over. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the town in hues of gold and crimson. Josephine pulled away from Everett's grasp once they were a safe distance from the saloon. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Xavier, but I don't need a husband, real or pretend," she said, trying to ignore how her heart raced from both fear and something else she couldn't quite name. Everett glanced back at the saloon, his expression grave. "I'm afraid you do, Miss Zeller, at least for now. Voss isn't the type to let things go, and being a lone woman in these parts makes you an easy target." "How do you know my name?" she asked suspiciously. "I overheard it in there," he replied, then added more softly, "and your brother told me to look out for you." Josephine froze. "You know Thomas?" Everett nodded. "We served together in the war. He wrote to me about a month ago, said he was in trouble and that his sister would be arriving in Silver Creek. Asked me to make sure you were safe." "Where is he now?" she asked urgently. "Not here," Everett said, looking around cautiously. "And we shouldn't be either. Voss has men all over town." "Come on, I have a place outside of town where we can talk safely." Josephine hesitated, studying the man before her. His face was tanned from the sun, with a strong jaw and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He was handsome, she had to admit, but that didn't mean she could trust him. "How do I know you're really Thomas's friend?" she challenged. "This could be a trick." A small smile touched Everett's lips. "Your brother has a scar on his left shoulder from when he fell out of a hayloft when he was 12. He carries a pocket watch that belonged to your father, with the inscription to William, my North Star, and he once told me his sister Josephine was the most stubborn woman in all of Pennsylvania." Relief washed over her. Those were details only someone who truly knew Thomas would know. Still, she maintained her cautious demeanor. "If I go with you, I want your word that you'll help me find my brother." "You have it," Everett said solemnly, "but first we need to get you somewhere safe." He led her to a hitching post where a magnificent black stallion stood waiting. Helping her onto the horse, he swung up behind her, and they rode out of town as the last light of day faded from the sky. The rhythmic sound of hoofbeats filled the silence between them as they traveled along a winding trail into the foothills. Josephine was acutely aware of Everett's presence behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins. Despite the circumstances, there was something reassuring about his solid strength. "Your brother didn't tell me you were coming so soon," Everett said after they'd been riding for a while. "I was planning to meet your stage tomorrow." "I arrived yesterday," Josephine explained. "Thomas's letter seemed urgent, so I left as quickly as I could. When I got to town, I started asking questions about him. That must have alerted Voss's men. Voss has eyes and ears everywhere in Silver Creek," Everett replied grimly. "He's been running things around here for the past 3 years. Most folks are too scared to stand against him." "What did Thomas take from him?" Everett was quiet for a moment. "It's complicated. Your brother found something evidence that could put Voss away for good. A ledger detailing all his illegal dealings, including some that implicate the county judge and sheriff." "So that's why the law hasn't stopped him," Josephine murmured. "Exactly. Thomas managed to get his hands on it, but Voss discovered the theft before he could get it to the federal marshal in Denver. They crested a hill, and in the moonlight, Josephine could make out a small cabin nestled among the pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "Who lives there?" she asked warily. "I do," Everett replied. "It's not much, but it's safe. Voss doesn't know about this place." As they approached, a dog began to bark, and a moment later, a large black and white border collie bounded toward them, tail wagging. "That's Ranger," Everett said, dismounting and helping Josephine down. "Best early warning system a man could ask for." Josephine reached down to pet the dog, who sniffed her hand before licking it in approval. The simple gesture brought the first smile to her face since her ordeal began. Everett led his horse to a small stable and took care of unsaddling and feeding him before joining Josephine at the cabin door. Inside, the space was modest but well kept. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the rustic furniture. A bookshelf lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a frontier home. "You can take the bed," Everett said, gesturing to a curtained-off area. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Thank you," Josephine said, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion, "for everything." Everett nodded, his expression softening. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to find your brother. As Josephine settled onto the bed, the events of the day caught up with her. She'd come west seeking her brother, only to find herself in danger, rescued by a stranger who claimed to be her intended, and now hiding in his cabin in the wilderness. Nothing had gone as planned, yet something told her that meeting Everett Xavier might be the one fortunate thing to happen since she'd left Pennsylvania. With the sound of Everett moving quietly around the cabin, she drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of rope and blue eyes and the word bride echoing through her mind. Josephine woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of crackling bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the memories of the previous day came rushing back: the saloon, Voss, and Everett Xavier, the man who had claimed her as his bride to save her. She pushed aside the curtain that separated the sleeping area from the rest of the cabin to find Everett at the small cast-iron stove, deftly turning strips of bacon in a skillet. He was dressed simply in a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His gun belt hung on a peg by the door within easy reach. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Hope you're hungry." "Starving, actually," she admitted, realizing she hadn't eaten since the previous morning. She'd been too anxious about meeting Thomas to eat when she'd first arrived in Silver Creek, and then Voss's men had found her. "There's water in that basin if you'd like to freshen up," Everett offered, nodding toward a corner where a washstand stood. Grateful for the chance to make herself presentable, Josephine splashed cold water on her face and used the provided comb to tame her tangled auburn hair. Her traveling dress was wrinkled and dusty, but there was little she could do about that. By the time she finished, Everett had set 2 plates on the small table. Beside the bacon were fluffy scrambled eggs and thick slices of bread with butter. "This looks wonderful," she said, taking a seat. "Nothing fancy," Everett replied with a modest shrug, "but it'll keep you going." They ate in silence for a few minutes, Josephine suddenly shy in the daylight with this man she barely knew. Through the cabin's window, she could see the mountains rising majestically in the distance, the morning sun painting their peaks gold. "Your cabin is in a beautiful location," she said finally. "It's peaceful," Everett agreed. "I came out here after the war, needed the quiet after all that noise and death." "Thomas was the same way when he first came home," Josephine said softly. "He couldn't stand to be in town, too many people, too many sudden sounds. He stayed at our family's farm for nearly a year before he could face crowds again." Everett nodded in understanding. The war changes a man. Some wounds don't show on the outside. There was something in his voice that made Josephine wonder what wounds he carried, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "How did you come to be in Silver Creek?" "I worked as a ranch hand for a while, saved up enough to buy this place about 2 years ago. I do some hunting, trapping, and guide work for folks heading into the mountains." He took a sip of his coffee. "Your brother and I kept in touch over the years. When he wrote that he was coming to this area, I was glad to have an old friend nearby." "And then he got himself into trouble," Josephine said with a sigh. "Thomas always did have a strong sense of justice," Everett replied with a wry smile. "When he saw what Voss was doing to the people around here, running honest ranchers off their land, controlling the town through fear, he couldn't stand by. So he stole this ledger, he did. But Voss found out before he could get it to someone who could help. Thomas had to go into hiding." "And where is he hiding?" Josephine asked, leaning forward. Everett hesitated. "I don't know his exact location. He thought it was safer that way. We arranged to meet tomorrow night at an old mining camp about 15 miles from here." "Then we'll go there," Josephine said decisively. "It's not that simple," Everett countered. "Voss and his men will be watching for you now. If they follow us, we could lead them straight to Thomas." "What do you suggest then?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "We need to throw them off our trail first," Everett said. "Make them think you've left the area." "And how do we do that?" A slow smile spread across Everett's face. Well, Mrs. Xavier, I believe we need to make our marriage official, at least as far as the town is concerned. Josephine nearly choked on her coffee. What? Voss heard me claim you as my bride. If we play into that story, go into town, register our marriage with the county clerk, be seen together as a happily wedded couple, it might convince him that you really did come to Silver Creek to marry me, not to meet your fugitive brother. That's preposterous, Josephine sputtered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Is it? Everett challenged. It gives you a reason to be here that has nothing to do with Thomas, and as my wife, you'd have my protection in the eyes of the law and local custom. We would be lying to everyone, she protested. We already started that lie in the saloon, he pointed out. This just takes it a step further. Josephine stood and paced the small confines of the cabin, her mind racing. The idea was outlandish, improper, and yet potentially effective. She had promised her parents, before leaving Pennsylvania, that she would find Thomas and bring him home safely. If this charade could help accomplish that, wasn't it worth considering? It would only be temporary, Everett added gently. Once Thomas is safe and Voss is dealt with, you could return east, and no one there would be the wiser. She stopped pacing and faced him. And what about you? Why would you agree to such an arrangement? Something flickered in Everett's eyes, something warm and genuine that made her breath catch. I gave Thomas my word that I'd protect you. This is the best way I know how. There was more to it than that, Josephine sensed, but she didn't press. Instead, she considered her limited options. She could refuse and try to find Thomas on her own, but that would be dangerous and likely futile. She could return east without her brother, breaking her promise. Or she could trust this man, this virtual stranger with kind eyes and gentle hands who had already saved her once. If we do this, she said slowly, I want to be clear that it's only for appearance's sake. A temporary measure until Thomas is safe. Of course, Everett agreed quickly. Perhaps too quickly, Josephine thought, and we would need to establish some boundaries, she continued, feeling her face grow warm again. A smile tugged at the corner of Everett's mouth. I'm a gentleman, Miss Zeller. You have nothing to fear from me. Something about his teasing tone put her at ease, and she found herself returning his smile. Very well, Mr. Xavier. It seems I'm to be your bride after all. Then we should head into town, Everett said, standing to clear their plates. There's a smaller settlement about 10 miles west of here, Clearwater. It's outside Voss's immediate influence, but word will get back to him. We can register our marriage there and buy you some proper clothes and supplies. I should change into something more presentable first, Josephine said, looking down at her rumpled dress. There's a trunk in the corner with some things that might fit you, Everett said, a hint of hesitation in his voice. They belong to my sister. She stayed with me for a while last year before moving on to California. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Josephine thanked him and went to investigate the trunk. Inside, she found several dresses, simpler than the fashionable attire she was accustomed to in Philadelphia, but well-made and clean. She selected a blue calico dress that looked close to her size and retreated behind the curtain to change. When she emerged, Everett was waiting by the door, his hat in his hands. He looked up, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Does it look all right? Josephine asked, suddenly self-conscious. It looks. You look beautiful, Everett said sincerely. Blue suits you. A warm flutter spread through her chest at his words. Thank you. Shall we go then, to make me a respectable woman? Everett laughed, a rich, pleasant sound that filled the cabin. Yes, madam. Let's go get ourselves married. The ride to Clearwater was peaceful, the morning sun warming their backs as they traveled through meadows dotted with wildflowers and stands of aspen trees whose leaves shimmered like gold coins in the breeze. Everett pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area, and Josephine found herself relaxing in his company. Have you always lived in Pennsylvania? He asked as they rode side by side along a wide trail. He'd brought a second horse for her, a gentle mare named Penny. Most of my life, Josephine replied. Our family has a farm outside Philadelphia. My parents still live there, though it's just the two of them now. Thomas left after the war, and I've been teaching at a girls' school in the city for the past 3 years. A teacher, Everett said with appreciation. That explains why you speak so properly, Josephine laughed. Is that a compliment or a criticism, Mr. Xavier? Definitely a compliment, he assured her with a smile. Though out here, folks might find it a bit fancy. And what about you? She asked. Where did you call home before the war? A shadow passed over Everett's face. New York, originally. My father was a banker. He had my future all planned out. I was to follow in his footsteps, marry the daughter of his business partner, live in a fine house in the city. But you had other ideas, Josephine guessed. The war came first, Everett said. I enlisted against my father's wishes. By the time I returned, I couldn't imagine going back to that life. Everything felt confined. I needed open skies and room to breathe. And your family. My father disowned me when I headed west instead of taking my place at the bank. My mother writes occasionally. My sister Clara visited last year, as I mentioned. She understands me better than the rest. Josephine felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry about your father, Everett shrugged. It was his choice. I've made my peace with it. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Josephine stole glances at her companion, noting the confident way he sat in the saddle, the alert set of his shoulders. There was something solid and reassuring about Everett Xavier, a quiet strength that put her at ease despite their unusual circumstances. By midday, they reached Clearwater, a modest settlement nestled in a valley beside a rushing stream. It was smaller than Silver Creek, but seemed more welcoming, with neat wooden buildings lining the main street and children playing in a schoolyard at the edge of town. We'll go to the county clerk first, Everett said as they tied their horses outside the general store. Then we can get what supplies we need. Josephine nodded, suddenly nervous. This deception had seemed reasonable back at the cabin, but now that they were about to make it official, even if only on paper, she felt a flutter of anxiety. Ready, Miss Zeller? Everett asked, offering his arm. She took a deep breath and placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. Ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Xavier. The county clerk's office was a small room at the back of the town hall. A thin man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his ledger as they entered. Good day to you folks, he greeted them. What can I do for you? We'd like to register our marriage, Everett said confidently. We were wed yesterday by Reverend Miller, who was passing through. Itinerant preacher, was he? The clerk asked, pulling out a form. We get those through here regular like. Don't suppose he gave you a certificate? I'm afraid not, Josephine said, finding her voice. He said the registration here would be sufficient. That it is, the clerk agreed, dipping his pen in ink. Names. Everett James Xavier and Josephine Elizabeth Zeller Xavier now, I suppose, Everett said with a smile directed at Josephine that made her heart skip. The clerk asked a few more questions, their ages, places of birth, current residence, all of which Everett answered smoothly. Josephine marveled at how easily the lies came to him, though she reminded herself it was all for Thomas's sake. Sign here, both of you, the clerk said finally, pushing the form toward them. That'll make it all legal and proper. Josephine hesitated only briefly before taking the pen. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name, adding Xavier after Zeller with a strange feeling of unreality. Everett's signature followed, strong and decisive. There you have it, the clerk said, applying the county seal to the document. May the Lord bless your union with many years of happiness and plenty of children to carry on the Xavier name. Josephine felt her face flush at his words. Everett thanked the man and paid the small registration fee, then guided her outside with a gentle hand at the small of her back. Well, Mrs. Xavier, he said once they were back on the street, how does it feel to be a married woman? Strange, she admitted. I never imagined my wedding would be quite so administrative, Everett laughed. Not the romantic ceremony you dreamed of as a girl. Not quite, she said with a smile. Though I suppose most girls don't get proposed to in a saloon while tied to a chair either. I'll make it up to you, he promised, his eyes twinkling. Starting with buying you a proper ring. Can't have my new bride without one people might talk. Before Josephine could protest, he was leading her toward the general store. Inside, among the diverse inventory of goods, the proprietor had a small case of jewelry. Everett selected a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It's lovely," Josephine said softly as he slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Not as fine as what you might have had back east," Everett said apologetically. "It's perfect," she assured him, surprised to find she meant it. "Thank you." They purchased other necessities, food supplies, ammunition for Everett's rifle, and a few pieces of clothing for Josephine, including a sturdy pair of riding boots and a warm shawl for the cool mountain evenings. As they were leaving the store, a middle-aged woman approached them with a friendly smile. "You two must be new to these parts. I'm Martha Donovan. My husband and I run the hotel just down the street." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Donovan," Everett said, tipping his hat. "I'm Everett Xavier, and this is my wife, Josephine. We're just married yesterday. Newlyweds," Mrs. Donovan exclaimed delightedly. "Well, congratulations to you both. You must join us for supper at the hotel dining room. I insist." Josephine glanced at Everett, who gave a subtle nod. "That's very kind of you," she said. "We'd be delighted. Wonderful, come by around 6. First meals on the house, our wedding gift to you." As Mrs. Donovan bustled away, Everett leaned in close to Josephine. "This is perfect," he murmured. "The more people who see us as a happily married couple, the more convincing our story becomes. Word travels fast in these small towns." "Yes," but Josephine began, but was interrupted by more townspeople coming to introduce themselves, drawn by Mrs. Donovan's excited announcements about the newlyweds. For the next hour they played their parts: Everett the proud husband, Josephine the blushing bride. She was surprised at how naturally it came to her, especially when Everett's arm slipped around her waist or when he looked at her with such convincing adoration. It was all an act, she reminded herself firmly, even as her pulse quickened under his attentive gaze. By late afternoon, they had met what seemed like half the town and received numerous invitations and well wishes. Josephine found herself genuinely liking the people of Clearwater. They were straightforward and kind, so different from the suspicious looks she'd received in Silver Creek. "We should head back soon if we're to return for supper," Everett said as they loaded their purchases onto the horses. "Do you really think it's necessary to come back?" Josephine asked, already knowing the answer. "The more witnesses to our happy marriage, the better," Everett confirmed. "Besides, Mrs. Donovan seems the type to be deeply offended if we don't show up after accepting her invitation." Josephine couldn't argue with that logic. They rode back to Everett's cabin to drop off their supplies. Then Josephine took time to freshen up and change into one of the new dresses. They'd purchased a pretty green calico with a fitted bodice and full skirt. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Everett had also changed into clean clothes and had even trimmed his beard. He stared at her for a long moment, and Josephine felt a flutter of self-consciousness under his gaze. "Is something wrong?" she asked, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. "No," he said quickly. "You look very nice." "Thank you," she replied, noticing how the crisp white shirt brought out the blue of his eyes. "So do you." The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken, until Ranger barked outside, breaking the spell. "We should go," Everett said, clearing his throat. "Don't want to be late." The ride back to Clearwater was quieter than their earlier journey, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Josephine found herself wondering what her parents would think of her situation. They had always hoped she would marry well, perhaps a lawyer or doctor back in Philadelphia. They certainly never imagined her as the wife of a frontier woodsman, even temporarily. Yet there was something about Everett that drew her to him. His quiet confidence, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. In different circumstances, she might have. She cut off that line of thinking abruptly. This was not a real marriage. It was a means to an end, finding Thomas and ensuring his safety. Once that was accomplished, she would return to her life in Pennsylvania, and Everett would go back to his solitary existence in the mountains. That was the agreement. The Clearwater Hotel was the largest building in town, a two-story structure with a wide porch and large windows glowing with lamplight. As they entered the dining room, Mrs. Donovan hurried over to greet them. "There's our lovely newlyweds," she exclaimed, leading them to a table in the corner that had been specially decorated with a small vase of wildflowers. "I've told everyone about you both." Indeed, many of the diners smiled and nodded in their direction. A few called out congratulations, which Everett acknowledged with a friendly wave. "Thank you for your kindness," Josephine said sincerely as they took their seats. "Nonsense, dear. We don't get many new folks settling in these parts, especially not such a handsome couple. Now, Henry will bring you our best wine, and I've told Cook to prepare something special." After Mrs. Donovan left, Everett leaned across the table. "I think we've found our greatest ally in spreading our story," he said with amusement. Josephine laughed softly. "She certainly seems enthusiastic about our marriage. Can you blame her? A mysterious couple arriving in town, newly wed. It's the most excitement Clearwater has probably seen in months." The wine arrived, followed by a delicious meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables. The food was simple but expertly prepared, and Josephine realized how long it had been since she'd enjoyed such a pleasant dining experience. As they ate, various townspeople stopped by their table to introduce themselves and offer congratulations. "How did you two meet?" asked the blacksmith's wife, a plump woman with rosy cheeks. Josephine froze, realizing they hadn't prepared a story for this inevitable question. Before panic could set in, Everett smoothly took her hand across the table. "I was guiding a hunting party from back east," he said, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "We stopped in Philadelphia for supplies, and I saw this beautiful woman teaching at the local school. I knew right then I had to meet her." "It wasn't quite that simple," Josephine added, finding her voice. "I thought he was terribly forward at first. She refused to speak to me for days," Everett continued with a rueful smile. "I had to be persistent. He wrote me letters for months after he returned west," Josephine improvised, warming to their fictional romance. "Beautiful letters about the mountains and the stars and the life we could build together. When she finally agreed to come visit, I knew I couldn't let her go back east without making her my wife," Everett finished, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How romantic," the blacksmith's wife sighed. "Just like in those novels my daughter reads." After she moved on, Josephine raised an eyebrow at Everett. "Letters about the stars? I thought it sounded poetic," he defended with a chuckle. "Besides, you were the one who called them beautiful." "I was merely following your lead," she replied, surprised by how easy it was to banter with him. "You're quite the storyteller, Mr. Xavier. A necessary skill out here," he said, "and I believe you should be calling me Everett now, Mrs. Xavier." The way he said her new title sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Very well, Everett," she said, testing the name on her tongue. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the rest of the dining room seemed to fade away. There was something in his gaze, a warmth, a question, perhaps even a hope that made Josephine wonder if this charade might be affecting him as much as it was affecting her. The spell was broken when the hotel owner, Mr. Donovan, approached with another bottle of wine. "On the house," he insisted. "Can't have newlyweds going thirsty on their first dinner out as man and wife." By the time they finished their meal and politely declined the offer to stay the night at the hotel, "We're eager to get back to our own home," Everett had explained with a meaningful look that made Josephine blush. It was fully dark outside. The stars spread across the sky in a brilliant canopy as they rode back toward Everett's cabin. "You were right," Josephine admitted as they traveled along the moonlit trail. That was helpful. If word reaches Voss, he'll hear that I truly am married to you. And that we're very much in love, Everett added with a hint of teasing in his voice. You were quite convincing, Josephine. As were you, she replied, grateful for the darkness that hid her flushed cheeks. Perhaps we missed our callings as stage actors. Everett laughed. I don't think I'd fare well on the stage. I prefer the honest life out here. Is it always honest? She asked curiously. After all, we just spent the evening weaving quite an elaborate fiction. That's different, he said seriously. Out here, a man's word is his bond. Break it and you might not survive. The lies we told tonight, they're protecting you and your brother. There's honor in that. Josephine considered his words. I suppose you're right. Still, it feels strange to deceive such kind people. Once this is over, we can tell them the truth if you want, Everett offered. Though Mrs. Donovan might be heartbroken. The thought of the kind woman's disappointment made Josephine smile despite herself. Perhaps some fictions are kinder than the truth. They reached the cabin well after midnight, both tired from the long day. As Everett tended to the horses, Josephine built up the fire that had burned low in their absence. When Everett came inside, he paused by the door, suddenly awkward. I'll sleep by the fire again, he said, avoiding her eyes. Of course, Josephine replied quickly, equally uncomfortable with the reminder of their false intimacy. Good night, then. Good night, wife, Everett said softly, the word hanging in the air between them like a question. As Josephine lay in bed that night, listening to Everett's steady breathing across the room, she found herself touching the pearl ring on her finger. It was all pretend, the marriage, the loving glances, the stories they'd shared. Yet something about it felt more real than she cared to admit. Tomorrow they would meet Thomas, and this strange interlude would begin to draw to a close. She should be glad, relieved that her brother would soon be safe and this deception could end. Instead, as sleep finally claimed her, Josephine found herself wondering what it might be like if the ring on her finger were more than just a prop in an elaborate charade. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong, and the soft golden light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Josephine woke to find Everett already up, checking his rifle at the table. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. Today they would finally meet Thomas. Morning, Everett greeted her. There's coffee on the stove. Thank you, she said, pushing back the covers and reaching for her shawl. What time will we leave? Mid-afternoon, he replied. The meeting place is about 4 hours' ride from here. We're to be there at sundown. Josephine nodded, pouring herself a cup of the strong, black coffee. Tell me about this place we're going. It's an abandoned mining camp in a canyon to the north, played out years ago so nobody goes there anymore. Thomas thought it would be safe for a meeting. And you're certain Voss doesn't know about it? Everett's expression grew serious. As certain as I can be. We've been careful, but Voss has resources. That's why we need to be vigilant today. They spent the morning preparing for the journey. Everett checked and rechecked his weapons, a Winchester rifle, his revolver, and the knife he'd used to cut Josephine free in the saloon. Josephine packed food and water, along with a small medical kit Everett kept in a cupboard. Just in case, he explained when she raised her eyebrows at the supplies. I'm hoping we won't need it, but it's best to be prepared. By early afternoon, they were ready to depart. Josephine had changed into her new riding clothes, a split skirt that allowed her to ride astride comfortably, and a sturdy jacket to ward off the mountain chill. She'd braided her hair tightly to keep it from tangling in the wind. You look like a proper frontier woman, Everett remarked as he helped her mount. Is that a compliment? She asked with a smile. Most definitely, he replied, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. The trail they followed was less defined than the road to Clearwater, winding through dense pine forests and across rocky slopes. Everett set a steady pace, occasionally stopping to check their surroundings or listen for any signs of pursuit. Josephine was impressed by his woodcraft, the way he read the landscape, noticed small details she would have missed. How did you learn all this? She asked during one of their brief rests. Tracking, survival skills. Some from the war, Everett said, scanning the horizon. But most from an old trapper named Davis who took me under his wing when I first came west. He'd been living in these mountains for 40 years, knew them like the back of his hand. Is he still around? A shadow crossed Everett's face. No, he passed 2 winters ago, pneumonia. I'm sorry, Josephine said softly. He lived the life he wanted, Everett replied after a moment. Free on his own terms, that's all any of us can ask for. As they continued their journey, the terrain grew more rugged. They followed a narrow trail along a ridge that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and sage. It's beautiful, Josephine said, taking in the vast landscape spread before them. I can see why you chose to stay here. It gets under your skin, Everett agreed. The space, the silence, makes a person feel small in a good way. Philadelphia seems very far away right now, she mused. Do you miss it? Everett asked, glancing over at her. Josephine considered the question. I miss certain things, my students. The library, hot baths, she added with a smile. But there's something compelling about this place too, a kind of freedom. That's exactly it, Everett said, his face lighting up. Freedom, room to breathe, to be yourself without all the constraints of society. Though society has its benefits, she pointed out. Schools, hospitals, law and order. True enough, Everett conceded. Though I'd argue we have our own kind of law out here, maybe rougher around the edges but based on the same principles: fairness, justice, protecting the innocent. Is that why you're helping Thomas and me? Justice? Everett was quiet for a moment. Partly, he said finally. Thomas is my friend and what Voss is doing is wrong, but it's more than that. What do you mean? Josephine asked. Before he could answer, his posture suddenly changed, alert and wary. He held up a hand for silence, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. What is it? Josephine whispered, tension coiling in her stomach. Riders, Everett said tersely, coming up the trail. Without another word, he guided them off the path and into a dense thicket of pine trees. They dismounted quickly, and Everett motioned for Josephine to stay low and quiet. Through the branches, they could see 3 men on horseback approaching along the ridge. Even from a distance, Josephine recognized the lead rider's hulking frame, Harlan Voss himself, with 2 of his men following close behind. How did they find us? She breathed, her heart pounding. They might not be looking for us specifically, Everett murmured. This trail leads to several mining areas. They could be checking all of them. Or someone in Clearwater talked, Josephine suggested. About the newlyweds heading into the mountains. Everett's expression hardened. Possible. Voss has informants everywhere. They remained motionless as the riders drew closer. Voss was saying something to his men, his voice carrying on the still air though the words were indistinct. They passed within 30 yards of the hiding place, close enough that Josephine could see the cruel set of Voss's mouth, the way his hand rested casually on his holstered gun. Only when the riders had disappeared around a bend in the trail did Everett relax slightly. They're heading toward the mining camp, he said grimly. We need to warn Thomas. How? They're between us and the meeting place. There's another way, Everett said, already leading the horses deeper into the trees. A longer route through the canyon. It'll be rough going, but we can get there before sundown if we hurry. The rough going proved to be an understatement. The alternate path took them down a steep, treacherous slope into a narrow ravine where they had to pick their way carefully over loose rock and fallen trees. The horses struggled at times, and more than once, Josephine feared they might lose their footing entirely. Everett moved with confident precision, guiding both his mount and Josephine's through the difficult terrain. His focus was intense, his jaw set with determination. There was no time for conversation now, only the urgent need to reach Thomas before Voss did. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finally emerged from the ravine into a broader canyon. Ahead, nestled against the far wall, Josephine could make out the weathered remains of several wooden structures, the abandoned mining camp. There's no sign of Voss, Everett said, scanning the area. We might have beaten them here. Or they could be hiding, waiting, Josephine pointed out anxiously. Everett nodded. Stay behind me, he said, drawing his rifle. And if I tell you to run, you do it. No arguments. They approached the camp cautiously, alert for any movement or sound. The buildings were in various states of decay: a collapsed bunkhouse, a listing assay office, and a more solid structure that had probably been the mine supervisor's quarters. Everything was silent except for the occasional creak of weathered wood in the light breeze. Thomas. Everett called softly as they reached the edge of the camp. It's Everett, are you here? For a long moment there was no response. Then, from the shadows of the supervisor's building, a figure emerged cautiously, a man about Everett's age with the same auburn hair as Josephine, though his was streaked with premature gray. Everett, he called back warily. Then his eyes fell on Josephine and his face lit up with recognition and alarm. Josie, what the devil are you doing here? Before she could answer, Everett held up a warning hand. Inside, quickly. Voss and his men are on their way. Thomas's expression darkened, and he gestured them toward the building he'd emerged from. Once inside, with the horses hidden behind the structure, Thomas embraced his sister tightly. I told you to meet me in town, not to come traipsing through the wilderness, he scolded, though his voice was thick with emotion. You know I couldn't stay away once I got your letter, Josephine replied, holding him at arm's length to examine him. He looked thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes, but his gaze was as steady and determined as ever. Voss's men caught her in Silver Creek, Everett explained tersely. They had her tied up in the saloon, trying to force her to reveal your location. Thomas's face paled. Josie, I'm so sorry, I never meant to put you in danger. I'm fine, she assured him. Everett rescued me. And now you're both in the thick of it with me, Thomas said grimly. Voss won't stop until he gets that ledger back. Do you still have it? Everett asked. Thomas nodded, moving to a loose floorboard in the corner and prying it up to reveal a small oilskin package. Everything's here: detailed records of Voss's operation. Bribes to the sheriff and judge, land grabs, even 2 murders he arranged to look like accidents. Enough to put him away for good, Everett said with satisfaction. If we can get it to the federal marshal in Denver, Thomas agreed. But that's a 4-day ride through territory Voss controls. We were seen in Clearwater yesterday, Josephine admitted. Someone must have told Voss we were heading this way. Thomas looked between them, confusion crossing his features. Clearwater, what were you doing there? Everett and Josephine exchanged a glance, and she felt her cheeks warm. That is, Everett claimed I was his bride to get me away from Voss, she explained. To make the story convincing, we registered our marriage in Clearwater. You're married, Thomas exclaimed. Not really, Josephine said quickly. It's just for appearance's sake until this is over. Thomas raised an eyebrow at Everett, who suddenly seemed very interested in checking his rifle. I see, Thomas said, a hint of amusement in his voice despite the gravity of their situation. Well, I appreciate you looking after my sister, even if your methods are unconventional. We need to focus on getting out of here, Everett said, clearly eager to change the subject. Voss could arrive any minute. There's a back trail that leads out of the canyon to the north, Thomas said, tucking the ledger inside his jacket. Not easy traveling, but it eventually connects with the stage road to Denver. Then that's our best option, Everett decided. If we leave now, we can put some distance between us, and he stopped abruptly as the sound of approaching horses reached them. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, they could see Voss and his men riding into the camp, weapons drawn. Too late, Thomas muttered. They're here. Everett moved quickly to the rear of the building, peering out another window. 3 of them, 3 of us, not bad odds. Except Josephine isn't armed, Thomas pointed out. I can shoot, Josephine said firmly. Both men looked at her in surprise. Father taught both of us, remember, I may be a schoolteacher, but I'm not helpless. Thomas smiled ruefully. I remember you outshot me more than once. Here, Everett said, handing her his revolver. 6 shots, make them count, Outside, Voss's voice rang out. "Xavier, Zeller, I know you're in there. Come out now and maybe I'll let the woman live." "Charming offer," Thomas muttered. "We need to split up," Everett said decisively. "Thomas, you and Josephine take the back trail. Get that ledger to Denver. I'll hold them off here." "No," Josephine protested immediately. "That's suicide." "I just need to buy you enough time to get away," Everett insisted. "I know these mountains. I can lose them." "Or they'll kill you," she argued, her chest tight with sudden fear. Thomas was shaking his head. "Everett's right, Josie. The ledger is what matters. If we all try to escape together, they'll catch us for sure. We need a diversion." "I'm not leaving him," Josephine said firmly, meeting Everett's gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection deeper than the brief time they'd known each other would suggest. "Actually," Everett said slowly, "I have another idea." He quickly outlined a plan risky, but with a better chance of all three of them escaping alive. Thomas would create a diversion at the front of the camp, while Everett and Josephine slipped out the back. Once Voss and his men gave chase, Thomas would double back and take the north trail toward Denver. They would reunite at a way station Everett knew, 2 days' ride from the mining camp. "It's still dangerous," Josephine pointed out. "Everything about this situation is dangerous," Everett replied. "But this way we all have a fighting chance." Thomas nodded in agreement. "I like it better than your first plan. No heroic last stands necessary." "Xavier," Voss called again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Final warning, go," Thomas urged them toward the back door. "I'll give you a count of 30, then start the show." Josephine hugged her brother fiercely. "Be careful," she whispered. "You too, little sister," he replied. "And Everett." He clapped his friend on the shoulder. "Take care of her." "With my life," Everett promised solemnly. They slipped out the back door while Thomas positioned himself near the front window. Everett led Josephine to where their horses were hidden, and they mounted silently, waiting for Thomas's diversion. They didn't have to wait long. The crack of gunfire split the air, followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Voss and his men returned fire, their attention completely focused on the building where Thomas was putting on quite a show, firing rapidly from different windows to give the impression of multiple defenders. "Now," Everett whispered, and they urged their horses forward, staying low in the saddles as they skirted the edge of the camp. They had almost reached the cover of the trees when a shout went up behind them. One of Voss's men had spotted their escape and was now racing toward his horse. "Ride." Everett commanded, and they spurred their mounts into a gallop, thundering down the canyon as bullets kicked up dust around them. The trail was treacherous at such speed, but there was no choice but to push on. Behind them, they could hear the pursuit, at least one rider, maybe more. Everett led them through a maze of rock formations, trying to use the terrain to their advantage. "There's a stream ahead," he called to Josephine. "We'll follow it to throw them off our trail." The water was shallow but swift, the horses splashing through it as they continued their desperate flight. Josephine's heart pounded in her chest, fear and exhilaration mingling with each thundering hoofbeat. She glanced back once to see a lone rider still following, gaining on them despite their efforts. "He's catching up," she shouted to Everett. Without slowing, Everett turned in his saddle and fired his rifle. The shot went wide, but it made their pursuer pull up momentarily, buying them precious seconds. They rounded a bend in the stream, and Everett suddenly veered onto a nearly invisible trail that climbed steeply up the canyon wall. Josephine followed, trusting his knowledge of the terrain. The path was barely wide enough for the horses, with a sheer drop to one side that made her stomach lurch. "Almost there," Everett encouraged as they neared the top of the ridge. Just as they crested the rise, a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Josephine's ear. Her horse reared in fright, and for a terrifying moment she thought she would be thrown over the edge. Then Everett was there, grabbing her reins, steadying the panicked animal. "I've got you," he said, his voice calm despite the danger. Their pursuer appeared on the trail below, taking aim for another shot. This time, Josephine was ready. She raised Everett's revolver and fired. The man yelled in pain as the bullet found his shoulder, and he lost his grip on his own weapon, which clattered down the rocky slope. "Nice shot," Everett said appreciatively as they urged their horses onward, away from the injured man. "I told you I could shoot," Josephine replied, her hands still shaking from the close call. They rode hard for another hour, taking a circuitous route through the mountains to ensure they weren't being followed. Only when Everett was confident they had lost any pursuit did they slow their pace, giving the exhausted horses a chance to recover. As the adrenaline of their escape faded, Josephine found herself worrying about Thomas. Had he managed to get away as well, or had Voss captured him, or worse, "He'll be all right," Everett said, as if reading her thoughts. "Your brother is resourceful. He knows these mountains almost as well as I do." "I hope you're right," she said, unable to shake her concern. "We'll meet him at the way station as planned," Everett assured her, "but for tonight we need to find shelter. There's a place not far from here, a line shack I use sometimes when I'm hunting in this area." The line shack turned out to be a small, sturdy cabin nestled in a stand of aspens. It was simple, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and some basic supplies, but after their harrowing escape, it looked like a palace to Josephine. Everett tended to the horses while she gathered wood for a fire. By the time darkness fell completely, they had a cheerful blaze going and a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee prepared. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Josephine found herself studying Everett's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his temple, the way his eyes reflected the dancing flames. In just a few days, this man had become vitally important to her. He'd saved her life, pretended to be her husband, and now risked everything to help her brother. And somewhere along the way, she had begun to care for him in a way that went beyond gratitude. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After this is all over, I mean." Everett looked up from the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Go back to my cabin, I suppose, return to my normal life." "Alone?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether my wife decides to return east or stay in the west," he said softly. Josephine's breath caught. "Everett, I know it was just pretend," he said quickly. "A story we created to protect you. But Josephine." He set aside his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her. "These past few days with you have been the most alive I've felt since before the war. You're brave and beautiful and stubborn in all the right ways." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the pearl ring she still wore. "I'm not asking for an answer now. You have a life back east and we're still in the middle of danger. But when this is over, when Thomas is safe and Voss is behind bars, I'd like you to consider making our arrangement more permanent." Josephine stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't part of the plan. They were supposed to go their separate ways once Thomas was safe. She had a teaching position waiting for her, students who depended on her, parents who expected her to return. Yet the thought of leaving the mountains, of leaving Everett, filled her with an unexpected sadness. In just a few days, he had shown her a different kind of life, one with its own challenges, but also with an honesty and freedom she had never known in Philadelphia. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything now," Everett assured her. "Just think about it." He started to move away, but Josephine tightened her grip on his hand. "Everett," she said softly, "I will think about it, very seriously." The smile that spread across his face made her heart flutter. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and brushed his lips against hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief, almost tentative, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or discomfort. Instead, Josephine found herself smiling. "That was nice," she whispered. "Yes, it was," he agreed, his voice husky. The moment was interrupted by a sudden gust of wind that rattled the shutters, reminding them of the world outside their small sanctuary. Everett reluctantly moved back to his side of the fire. "We should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "You take the bed," Josephine offered. "I can sleep by the fire." Everett shook his head. "No, you need proper rest. I'll be fine here." Josephine wanted to argue but knew it would be futile. Everett Xavier was a gentleman to his core, despite his rough exterior. It was one of the many things she was coming to admire about him. As she settled onto the narrow bed, pulling the rough woolen blanket around her, she found herself touching her lips, still feeling the gentle pressure of his kiss. Outside, the wind whispered through the aspen leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled lonely and wild and free. Just like the man sleeping across the room. Just like the life he was offering her if she had the courage to reach for it. Morning arrived with a gentle rain pattering against the cabin roof. Josephine woke to find Everett already up, cooking something that smelled delicious over the rekindled fire. "Hope you like trout," he said when he noticed she was awake. "Caught a couple in the stream while you were sleeping. You went fishing in the rain?" She asked, sitting up and combing her fingers through her tangled hair. "Best time for it," he replied with a smile. "And I wanted to check if we were still alone up here. Are we, as far as I can tell? No sign of Voss or his men. With luck, they're still chasing shadows in the wrong direction." The fish was perfectly cooked, flaky and tender. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the rain against the roof and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. "We'll need to wait for the rain to ease before we head out," Everett said. "The trails will be slick and visibility is poor." Josephine nodded in agreement, secretly glad for the delay. This small cabin, with just the two of them sheltered from the storm, felt like a world apart from the dangers that awaited them outside. "Tell me more about your life in Philadelphia," Everett said, settling back with his coffee. "You're teaching your students." Josephine smiled, warmed by his interest. "I teach at a small school for girls. Most are from working families who want their daughters to have more opportunities than they had. Reading, writing, arithmetic, of course, but also literature, history, some science." "You enjoy it," Everett observed. "Very much," she admitted. "There's something wonderful about watching a child grasp a new idea, seeing that moment of understanding light up their face." "You'd be missed if you didn't return," he said quietly. Josephine met his gaze. "Yes, I would," she said honestly, "but teachers can be replaced, the school would continue." "And what about your own dreams?" Everett asked. "Beyond teaching, what do you want from life?" It was a question Josephine had rarely considered. As a woman in Philadelphia, her options had seemed limited: teaching until she married, then running a household and raising children. But here in the West, with Everett, she glimpsed different possibilities. "I've always wanted to write," she confessed. "Stories about real people facing real challenges. Not the romanticized tales you find in dime novels, but honest accounts of courage and perseverance." "You'd find plenty of material out here," Everett said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I already have," she replied softly, holding his gaze. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Everett set down his coffee cup and moved to sit beside her on the rough wooden bench. "Josephine," he began, taking her hand in his. Before he could continue, a sound outside made them both freeze, the unmistakable approach of horses. Everett was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, as he moved to the window. "Two riders," he reported in a hushed voice. "Coming up the trail." Josephine joined him at the window, her heart pounding. Through the rain, she could make out two mounted figures approaching slowly, their features obscured by rain-slicked hats and slickers. "Voss," she whispered fearfully. Everett shook his head. "Can't tell yet, stay back." He positioned himself beside the door, rifle ready. Josephine picked up his revolver from the table, checking that it was loaded. The riders stopped about 20 yards from the cabin. One of them dismounted and approached on foot, hands conspicuously away from his weapons. "Hello, the cabin." A familiar voice called, "Everett, Josie, it's Thomas." Relief flooded through Josephine. "Thomas," she exclaimed, moving toward the door. Everett caught her arm. "Wait," he cautioned. "It could be a trick." "Everett, it's me," Thomas called again. "Remember the time in Vicksburg when you lost your shirt in that poker game and had to walk back to camp wearing only your Union suit?" Everett's face broke into a grin. "It's him," he confirmed, lowering his rifle and opening the door. Thomas hurried inside, followed by a second man older with a weathered face and a silver star pinned to his rain-slicked coat. "Marshal Frank Donovan," the man introduced himself. "Denver office." Josephine looked at her brother in confusion. "I thought we were meeting at the way station." "Change of plans," Thomas explained, shaking water from his hat. "I ran into the marshal on the stage road. He was already on his way to investigate reports about Voss. Been tracking that snake for months," Marshal Donovan growled. "Never had enough evidence to move against him until now." He nodded toward Thomas. "Your brother here says you've got a ledger that might change that." "It's with Thomas," Everett said. "Did you have any trouble getting away from the mining camp?" Thomas grinned. "None at all." "Voss and his men went tearing after a pair of riders heading south, probably thought it was you too. I slipped out during the confusion and headed straight for the stage road." "What about the man who followed us?" Josephine asked. "I shot him in the shoulder." "Found him limping back toward town," the marshal said with grudging respect. "Said a woman put a bullet in him. Didn't believe it until now." "My sister's always been a good shot," Thomas said proudly. "So what happens now?" Everett asked, addressing the marshal. "Now we end this," Donovan replied grimly. "I've got deputies waiting in Clearwater. Once the rain lets up, we'll head there and organize a proper posse. Then we're going to Silver Creek to arrest Voss and anyone working with him." "He won't go quietly," Everett warned. "They never do," the marshal agreed. "But with this ledger and witnesses like yourselves, we've got him cornered legally. He can come peaceful or not either way. His reign ends today." The rain eased by mid-morning, and they set out for Clearwater with renewed determination. The mood was cautiously optimistic. They had the evidence, they had the law on their side, and soon they would have justice. As they rode, Josephine found herself stealing glances at Everett. Their conversation from that morning and the kiss from the night before lingered in her mind. The marshal's arrival had interrupted a moment of decision, leaving questions unanswered and feelings unresolved. They reached Clearwater by early afternoon to find 5 more deputy marshals waiting as promised. The townspeople watched curiously as the group gathered outside the hotel where Marshal Donovan laid out his plan of action. "Xavier, you know the terrain best," the marshal said. "I want you at the front with me. Zeller, you've seen Voss's operation firsthand. You'll come too." "The lady stays here where it's safe." "No," Josephine said firmly, drawing surprised looks from the men. "I'm coming with you." "This isn't a job for a woman," Donovan began. "With all due respect, Marshal," Josephine interrupted, "I was the one Voss had tied to a chair. I was the one he threatened, and I helped fight off his men during our escape. I have every right to see this through." The marshal looked to Everett, clearly expecting him to overrule her. Instead, Everett smiled proudly. "She's right," he said. "Besides, she's a better shot than half your deputies, I'd wager." Donovan sighed in resignation. "Fine, but you stay back when we reach town, understand? No heroics." Josephine nodded in agreement, catching Everett's approving glance. Thomas just shook his head with a knowing smile. As the posse prepared to depart, Mrs. Donovan, no relation to the marshal, just a coincidence of names, hurried out of the hotel with a basket of food for their journey. "Take care of each other," she said, her eyes lingering on Josephine and Everett. "And come back safe to tell me all about it. We don't get enough excitement in Clearwater." "We'll be back," Everett promised, his words carrying a weight that made Josephine's heart skip a beat. Was he thinking beyond this mission? To a future where they might return to Clearwater together, not as a pretend couple, but as a real one. The ride to Silver Creek took several hours, the posse traveling at a steady pace to keep their horses fresh. As they approached the town, Marshal Donovan split them into smaller groups to surround the settlement and prevent any escape. "Voss is likely at his ranch just outside town or at the Saloon," Thomas informed them. Those are his centers of operation. We'll check the saloon first, the marshal decided. If he's not there, someone will know where to find him. The sun was setting as they rode into Silver Creek, casting long shadows down the main street. Unlike their first arrival, when Josephine had come alone and vulnerable, this time she entered with a sense of purpose, flanked by lawmen and the two men she trusted most in the world. The townsfolk quickly cleared the streets at the sight of the approaching force, ducking into buildings and peering anxiously from windows. Word of their arrival had clearly preceded them. The marshal and his deputies dismounted in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon, the same establishment where Josephine had been held captive just days before. The memory made her shiver, but she straightened her spine and dismounted alongside Everett and Thomas. "Stay behind me," Everett murmured as they approached the batwing doors. The saloon fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to the formidable group. Harlan Voss sat at his usual table in the back, playing cards with three of his men. He looked up slowly, his expression changing from annoyed to wary as he took in the marshal's badge and the determined faces surrounding him. "Marshal," he acknowledged coolly, "to what do I owe this pleasure?" "Harlan Voss," Donovan said formally, "I'm placing you under arrest for extortion, bribery of public officials, theft of property, and suspicion of murder." A tense silence followed the declaration. Voss's men shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their weapons. "That's quite a list of charges," Voss said, his voice dangerously calm. "I don't suppose you have any evidence for these accusations?" Thomas stepped forward, holding up the ledger. "Everything's right here, Voss. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every threat. It's over." Voss's eyes narrowed as he recognized Thomas, then widened slightly when they fell on Josephine standing beside Everett. "The schoolteacher and the mountain man," he said with a humorless laugh. "Quite the pair you two make. Tell me, was the marriage just a convenient lie, or is there something more there?" "That's none of your concern," Everett replied evenly. "On your feet, Voss," the marshal ordered. "Nice and slow." For a moment it seemed Voss might comply. Then, with startling speed, he flipped the table and drew his gun, firing wildly as his men did the same. Chaos erupted in the saloon. Everett pushed Josephine behind a pillar as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass all around them. The deputies returned fire, and the air filled with gun smoke and shouts. Through the confusion, Josephine saw Voss making for the back door, using his men as cover. Without thinking, she raised her borrowed revolver and fired, catching him in the leg. He stumbled but kept going, disappearing through the door. "He's getting away," she called to Everett, who was exchanging fire with one of Voss's men. With a final, well-placed shot, Everett dispatched his opponent and turned to Josephine. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the back door. But Josephine had no intention of staying behind. This man had threatened her, had put her brother in danger, had terrorized an entire town. She followed Everett, ignoring his frustrated glance when he realized she was behind him. They emerged into an alley where Voss was attempting to mount a horse despite his wounded leg. Seeing them, he abandoned the effort and limped toward a stack of crates, using them as cover to fire at his pursuers. Everett pushed Josephine behind him as bullets struck the wall near their heads. "We need to flank him," he said. "I'll go left, you stay here." "Be careful," she urged, genuine fear for him tightening her chest. Everett nodded once, then darted across the alley, drawing Voss's fire. The outlaw was so focused on Everett that he didn't notice Josephine moving cautiously along the wall, approaching from his blind side. "It's over, Voss," Everett called. "Throw down your weapon." "It's never over," Voss snarled, firing again. "You think you can just ride in here and take everything I've built? This is my town." "Not anymore," Josephine said from behind him, her revolver aimed steadily at his back. Voss froze, then slowly turned to face her, his expression a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. "Well, well. The schoolteacher has teeth after all." "Drop the gun," she ordered, her voice remarkably calm despite her racing heart. For a tense moment, Voss hesitated, his eyes calculating. Then, with a sudden movement, he swung his weapon toward her. Two shots rang out simultaneously, one from Josephine's revolver and one from Everett's rifle. Voss jerked backward, a look of shock on his face as he crumpled to the ground. Everett was at Josephine's side in an instant, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes wild with concern. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. "Is he?" Everett knelt beside the fallen outlaw, checking for signs of life. "He's gone," he confirmed grimly. Marshal Donovan and Thomas burst into the alley, weapons drawn. Seeing the situation was under control, the marshal approached Voss's body while Thomas hurried to his sister. "Josie, are you all right?" he asked, echoing Everett's concern. "Yes," she said, still processing what had happened. I shot him." "We both did," Everett said quietly. "You did what you had to do." The marshal stood, holstering his weapon. "It was a clean shooting," he declared. "Voss drew on you first with witnesses. There won't be any charges." Josephine nodded numbly, allowing Everett to lead her back toward the main street. The gunfire had stopped, and the deputies were herding Voss's surviving men into a wagon for transport to the county jail. The townspeople were emerging cautiously from their hiding places, looking both fearful and hopeful as they realized what had happened. An older man approached the marshal, hat in hand. "Is it true?" he asked. "Is Voss really dead?" "It's over," Donovan confirmed. "Silver Creek is free of him." A cheer went up from the gathering crowd, growing in volume as the news spread. Several people approached Thomas, Everett, and Josephine, offering thanks and congratulations. It was overwhelming, and Josephine found herself leaning against Everett for support. "Let's get you somewhere quiet," he murmured, noticing her fatigue. The hotel owner, eager to accommodate the town's heroes, offered them rooms for the night at no charge. Josephine gratefully accepted, suddenly aware of just how exhausted she was. "Get some rest," Everett said as they reached her door. "It's been a long day, will you?" She began, then hesitated, unsure how to express what she wanted. Everett seemed to understand. "I'll be right next door if you need anything," he assured her. "And we can talk in the morning when things are calmer." She nodded, oddly disappointed yet relieved at the same time. There was so much to process, so much to decide. "Good night, Everett," she said softly. "Good night, Josephine," he replied, his eyes conveying everything his words did not. As she closed the door behind her, Josephine realized that the pearl ring still gleamed on her finger. She touched it gently, remembering Everett's words from the line shack. "When this is over, I'd like you to consider making our arrangement more permanent." Now it was over. Voss was dead, Thomas was safe, and the ledger would ensure that his corrupt allies would face justice as well. The immediate danger had passed, which meant decisions had to be made: return to Philadelphia and her teaching position, or stay in the West with Everett, building a new life in this wild, beautiful land. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting up from the saloon, Josephine found that her heart had already made its choice. Morning brought a clarity that had been missing in the chaotic aftermath of the previous day's events. Josephine woke feeling rested and resolved, knowing exactly what she wanted to do. She dressed carefully in one of the new outfits purchased in Clearwater, taking extra time with her hair. When she finally descended to the hotel dining room, she found Thomas and Marshal Donovan already there, deep in conversation over breakfast. "Ah, here's the lady of the hour," the marshal greeted her. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Much better, thank you," Josephine replied, taking a seat beside her brother. "What happens now?" "I'll be taking the prisoners and evidence to Denver for trial," Donovan explained. "Your brother has agreed to testify. We should be able to root out all of Voss's corrupt officials with his help." "And after that?" she asked Thomas. He smiled, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in years. I thought I might head back east for a visit. Ma and Pa would like that, I think. Then, I'm not sure. The West still feels more like home to me now. Josephine nodded in understanding. And where is Everett this morning? A knowing look passed between Thomas and the marshal. Said he had some business to attend to, Thomas replied. Should be back soon. As if summoned by their conversation, the hotel door opened and Everett himself walked in. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed, and he wore a clean shirt under his best vest. When his eyes found Josephine, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart race. "Good morning," he said, approaching their table. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Josephine replied, suddenly feeling shy under his intent gaze. Thomas cleared his throat. "Marshal, I believe we have some paperwork to review before we depart. In your room, perhaps?" "What? Oh, yes," Donovan agreed, catching on quickly. "Very important paperwork, if you'll excuse us." The two men made a hasty exit, leaving Josephine and Everett alone at the table. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. "I visited the telegraph office this morning," Everett said finally. "Sent a message to your parents letting them know you and Thomas are safe." "That was thoughtful," Josephine said, touched by his consideration. "Thank you." "I also went by the county clerk's office," he continued, his voice growing more serious, "about our situation." Josephine's heart sank. "You had the marriage annulled?" "No," Everett said quickly. "I wanted to discuss the options with you first. If you wish to return east, an annulment would be simple enough. The clerk said since the marriage was never consummated." He cleared his throat, a flush spreading across his tanned face. "It could be as if it never happened." "And if I don't wish to return east?" Josephine asked softly. Everett's eyes widened slightly. "Then the marriage could stand," he said carefully, "if that's what you wanted." "What do you want, Everett?" He took a deep breath, then reached across the table to take her hands in his. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past few days have shown me what you're made of: your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. I've never met anyone like you, Josephine, and I don't want to let you go." Her throat tight with emotion, Josephine turned her hands to clasp his. "When I came west, I was only thinking of finding Thomas and returning home. I never expected to find something else, someone else." "Is that a yes?" Everett asked, hope brightening his blue eyes. "It's a yes," Josephine confirmed with a smile. "I want to stay. With you." The joy that spread across Everett's face was a sight to behold. He stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, heedless of the few other diners watching with interest. "I promise to make you happy," he murmured against her hair, "to build a good life together." "I know you will," she said, drawing back to look up at him. "And I promise the same." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their decision: no longer pretend, no longer temporary, but a true beginning. When they finally separated, Everett kept his arms around her waist, reluctant to let go. "There's something else," he said. "I spoke with the town council this morning. With Voss gone, they're looking to rebuild Silver Creek properly. They need a school teacher." Josephine's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed. "I told them my wife was the finest teacher in Pennsylvania. They'd like to meet with you today if you're interested." "Your wife," Josephine repeated, savoring the word. "I suppose I am that, aren't I, in name?" Everett said. "Though I was thinking we might have a proper ceremony, something small but meaningful with Thomas present before he leaves for Denver." "I'd like that," she agreed. "And after," Everett continued, "we could build a new cabin larger than my current place, with proper glass windows and maybe a small room for your writing." "You remembered," she said, touched that he'd recalled her dream of becoming a writer. "I remember everything you've told me," he said seriously. "Your hopes, your dreams, they matter to me, Josephine. I want to help make them come true." Standing there in his arms, in a town newly freed from tyranny, Josephine Zeller Xavier felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. The path ahead would not be easy. Frontier life never was, but they would face it together, building something meaningful in this wild, beautiful land. You already have, she told him softly, and sealed her words with another kiss. 3 years later, Josephine stood on the porch of their home at the edge of Silver Creek, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. So much had changed since that fateful day when a stranger had cut her free from a chair in the saloon and claimed her as his bride. The town had flourished after Voss's death. With the corrupt officials removed and honest leadership installed, Silver Creek had grown into a respectable community. New businesses had opened, families had moved in, and a sense of optimism had replaced the former atmosphere of fear. Josephine's school had expanded from a single room to a proper building with 3 classrooms and 2 additional teachers. Her methods had been praised by the Territorial Education Board, and she'd been asked to help develop curriculum for other frontier schools. In her spare time, she wrote. Her stories of frontier life, published under her married name in newspapers back east, had gained a following. Just last month, a publishing house in New York had expressed interest in collecting them into a book. Everett had prospered as well. His knowledge of the mountains had made him invaluable as the area developed. He worked as a guide for survey teams, hunted for the growing town, and had recently been elected to the town council, much to his initial dismay and eventual acceptance. The sound of hoofbeats drew Josephine's attention to the path leading to their home. Everett appeared, riding his faithful stallion with their 2-year-old daughter, Emma, perched in front of him in the saddle, her auburn curls so like her mother's bouncing with each step of the horse. "Mama." Emma called excitedly as they approached. "We saw deer, 3 of them," Everett confirmed, dismounting and lifting Emma down, "a doe and 2 fawns just beyond the creek." "Were they very beautiful?" Josephine asked, kneeling to embrace her daughter. "So beautiful," Emma assured her with the solemnity only a child can muster. "Papa says we can watch for them again tomorrow." "That sounds wonderful," Josephine said, smoothing the girl's wild hair. "Now, why don't you go wash up for supper? It's almost ready." As Emma scampered inside, Everett pulled Josephine to her feet and into his arms. "Hello, wife," he murmured, placing a kiss on her forehead. "Hello, husband," she replied with a smile. "Good day." "Better now," he said, his arms tightening around her. "Any word from Thomas?" A letter came this afternoon. "He's settled in Denver now, working with the marshal's office. Says he might come visit next month." "Good," Everett said. "Emma misses her uncle, and it's been too long since we've seen him." They stood together on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. Their home was everything Everett had promised: spacious and well-built, with glass windows, a proper kitchen, and a small study where Josephine wrote. Adjacent to the main house was a workshop where Everett crafted furniture during the winter months, a skill he'd discovered he had a talent for. "I got a letter from my mother, too," Josephine said after a moment. "She and father are considering visiting in the spring." Everett raised an eyebrow. "Your father actually agreed to come west. Apparently, reading his daughter's stories in the Philadelphia Inquirer has piqued his curiosity," Josephine said with a laugh. "Though I suspect mother simply wore him down." "We'll need to prepare Emma for the grandparents she's never met," Everett mused. "Make sure she's on her best behavior." "Oh, I think she'll charm them completely, just as she does everyone else," Josephine said confidently. "She has her father's way with people." Everett chuckled. "And her mother's determination." Inside, the sound of something clattering to the floor, followed by Emma's "oops," made them both laugh. "I should go see what disaster our daughter has created now," Josephine said, reluctantly pulling away from Everett's embrace. He caught her hand before she could go, his expression suddenly serious. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying here instead of returning to Philadelphia?" It was a question he rarely asked anymore, but Josephine understood the occasional need for reassurance. She stepped back into his arms, resting her hand against his cheek. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "Everything I need is right here, you, Emma, our home, my school, my writing. This is where I belong, Everett, where we belong." The smile that spread across his face was worth more than all the comforts of Eastern civilization. He leaned down to kiss her properly, a kiss that still made her heart race even after 3 years of marriage. "I love you, Josephine Zeller," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you," she replied, "my rescuer, my husband, my heart." Another crash from inside, louder this time, broke the moment. Everett laughed and released her. "Go save our kitchen. I'll take care of the horse and be right in." As Josephine hurried inside to tend to their spirited daughter, she reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this life. Being tied to that chair in the saloon had seemed like the worst possible circumstance at the time. Now, she knew it had been the beginning of her greatest adventure, one that would continue day by day, year by year, with the man who had cut her free and claimed her as his bride. And she wouldn't change a single moment of it.